Today we're reviewing the new MSI MPG 272 URX. This is the company's latest 27-inch sized QD-OLED gaming monitor, which is their first to offer a 3840 by 2160 4K resolution combined with a 240Hz refresh rate in a monitor of this size. This offers an increased pixel density of around 166 ppi. That offers excellent picture quality and sharpness for all applications and uses. This year is the first time that 4K resolution and pixel density has been available on a 27-inch consumer OLED monitor, and a lot of people have been eagerly waiting for it to be launched. We took an early look at this specific screen back in December actually, when a pre-production sample was made available to us. But we've now come back to carry out a full review and testing now that the monitor has been finalised, the firmware has been updated, and it's in mass production and ready to buy. We expect availability to be fairly limited in the early days, as is common for most new monitor releases, but you'll find links to check availability and pricing in the description below. Let's do a quick run through then of a couple of the key specs and features before we get into our extensive testing results. The MPG 272 URX is built around what we refer to as a Gen 4 Samsung Display QD-OLED panel, one of their latest that's been produced in 2025, which includes their newest technologies and other distinct changes from last year's Gen 3 panels, including an updated EL material and higher pixel density. We recently provided a complete summary of all of the latest QD-OLED technologies, news and roadmaps in our video that's linked below if you want to know a lot more about that topic. MSI talk about this in their marketing as well, including the panel's 5-layer tandem structure and the EL Gen 3 technology, which is basically technical talk for the latest QD-OLED developments for 2025. The key point here really is that these new technologies have allowed Samsung Display to maintain the 1000 nits peak brightness spec on this new 4K panel, like on their previous panels from the last couple of years, despite the higher pixel density which would otherwise impact the brightness. The Gen 4 panels reportedly also bring improvements to longevity and burn-in resistance, and that's been combined with an updated and comprehensive set of MSI OLED Care 2.0 features on this model. That will help protect the panel over time and reduce the risk of image retention and burn-in. Many of these OLED Care features are familiar to us, having reviewed plenty of other MSI OLED monitors over the last couple of years, and there's a big selection that you can use and choose from, which also includes a new V-split detection setting, which helpfully detects vertical boundaries like when you're using the screen for split screen working and dims those areas to help try and avoid burn-in. There's a fanless design with a custom heatsink and graphene panel used for cooling, and the screen is also backed by their 3-year warranty, including cover for burn-in, as with their 2024 and 2025 OLED displays. The only thing missing really is a proximity sensor which would turn the screen off when you move away from it, which we were told at CES was something that they're looking to include on future OLED monitors in their range, including the upcoming 27-inch 500Hz model due to be released later this year. Another big marketing point of the MPG 272 URX is the inclusion of a proper DisplayPort 2.1 connection, with the maximum UHBR20 speeds and 80 gigabits per second bandwidth available. This allows for an uncompressed video signal to be used if you have a compatible graphics card with a UHBR20 connection, like for instance the new NVIDIA RTX 50 series GPUs. That bypasses the need to use display stream compression or DSC like you would have to on a DisplayPort 1.4 graphics card. You can of course still use a DP 1.4 card as with other previous 4K 240Hz monitors, as the connection is backwards compatible anyway. Or indeed you could use a lower speed DP 2.1 graphics card if you have one from AMD for instance. But you may miss a few features, largely in the gaming area, that we'll talk about a little bit later because of the need to use DSC in those situations. Note that only a full UHBR20 graphics card and monitor connection is enough to power this spec without needing to use DSC at all. Whether you use DP 1.4 or full speed DP 2.1, you shouldn't notice any difference in image quality though, as DSC is a visually lossless signal. It's nice to see DP 2.1 included though on a modern monitor, now that the graphics card market is more widely adopting this connection and other challenges with the uptake are starting to be addressed. We'll be testing DP 2.1 in a lot more detail soon and providing an update on the whole area, so make sure you hit subscribe if you want to stay up to date on that. Along with the DP 2.1 connection, there's also USB Type-C connectivity with DisplayPort alt mode, data transmission and a high 98 watts power delivery. There's also a KVM switch function, picture-in-picture and picture-by-picture support, proper HDMI 2.1 ports for consoles, 2 USB data ports and support for firmware updates from the monitor. The design is very similar to MSI's previous OLED monitors over the last couple of years, and the stand provides a full range of ergonomic adjustments, although we found tilt and height to be quite stiff on our unit when we tested it. The stand does provide a nice sturdy and stable base for the panel though, and the on-screen menu is quick and easy to use with the 5-way joystick control on the back. So let's get into the testing then, and we first of all measured the screen in SDR mode out of the box. This comes in the Eco mode with a pretty restricted brightness that we expect most people will want to change. With the brightness set at its default level of 70, the screen only reaches 53 nits luminance, and even if you change the brightness slider all the way up to 100, it only reaches 83 nits maximum. We won't dwell on the performance in this mode much due to the very limited brightness by design, but the gamma was nice and accurate, close to 2.2, and the grayscale temperature was slightly off and a little bit too warm with a 4 to 5% deviance from the 6500 Kelvin target. That's just the default energy saving mode anyway, so let's move on to one of the other more normal modes and measure those more thoroughly. We switch to the user mode first of all, which continues to operate with the screen's native colour space, with the screen still set at the default settings. The screen could now reach a lot brighter than the Eco mode though, with an available adjustment range between 26 and 265 nits, reaching a little higher than the specified 250 nits for SDR in fact. In SDR mode, this was achieved with a uniform brightness behaviour with no ABL dimming at all at any of the brightness levels, avoiding any noticeable brightness fluctuations as you resize or move windows and content around. That was great news of course for office applications. This was on par with other previous MSI OLED monitors that we've tested in terms of brightness. The upper brightness range is on par also with the ASUS PG27UCDM, which uses the same panel, when that's configured in its uniform brightness mode, and basically in keeping with most other OLED monitors released so far. Some people may prefer to turn off uniform brightness in SDR mode for gaming and multimedia, allowing you to in theory push luminance a bit more but with ABL dimming then present. The MPG 272URX doesn't actually offer this option unfortunately, although we expect that most people will prefer to use the default uniform brightness behaviour anyway, especially for desktop applications and office work. The brightness range remains pretty consistent in all of the preset modes, with the exception of that darker Eco mode, and you can see that our measurements here, along with some recommendations for screen settings to achieve several common target luminance levels. This performance was consistent in Windows desktop by the way, outside of normal test patterns. Gamma was nice and accurate with a 2.23 average measured and pretty consistent tracking across the grayscale. The colour temp was a little too warm, by around 5 to 6%, and this resulted in a very slight pinkish tint to grey and white, and a grayscale delta E average of 2.4 which was reasonable. As normal, the screen has a very wide colour space, stretching a large way beyond the sRGB reference space with 135% relative coverage measured. That leads to oversaturation of red and green shades and poor colour accuracy for sRGB content. That's normal though and expected for any wide gamut screen when viewing SDR and sRGB content. The colour space of this panel is quite close to the wider DCI P3 reference, although overextends a bit in reds and greens still, with a 108% relative coverage measured. Colour accuracy of DCI P3 colours was better though, with Delta E 2.4 average in the default mode, which was reasonable. You can see here that there is also good absolute coverage for the Adobe RGB colour space, although quite a lot of overextension which we will need to address if we want to work more accurately in that gamut. The overcoverage is mostly in the red shades in this instance. The screen provides preset emulation modes in the Pro menu for different colour spaces, including sRGB, DCI P3 and Adobe RGB. We measured the sRGB mode first of all, which is likely to be the most commonly used and the most useful to people, clamping the very wide native colour space back to the smaller sRGB reference, which is used for SDR content and for most regular content. In this mode, the gamma had been configured to an sRGB gamma curve instead of the common 2.2 gamma, but this does help with shadow detail quite nicely and brings out the darker grey shades in testing more clearly. In the other modes, there is some black crush, which is pretty common on an OLED monitor, where the darkest grey shade detail is lost. The night vision setting in the OSD menu may help tweak this a little bit in the other modes if you find it problematic. In sRGB mode, the brightness is set at 15% by default, leaving us with a 17 nits luminance, which is likely to be a bit too dark for most people, but there is access to the brightness control still in the menu, and the same adjustment range available up to 265 nits if you need to make changes. The color temp and white point remain a little too warm by 5 to 6% again, and in this preset mode there's no access to alter the color temp or RGB levels yourself, unfortunately. It's a minor problem though, and unlikely to cause any significant issues to most people. The main reason to consider using this sRGB mode is that it offers a very good clamping of the native color space back to the sRGB reference, with only very minor over coverage measured now. Colours in SDR and sRGB content look more natural, with no oversaturation and none of the neon looking reds and greens that you had before in the native gamma operation. We measured a delta E average of 1.3 in this mode, which offered very good colour accuracy for sRGB. The DCI-P3 mode provided some small tweaks to the panel's native colour space, clamping it back slightly to be closer to DCI-P3. If you need to work specifically with P3 content, often used in the HDR space, then this could be useful as a mode if you don't have your own calibration tool. This removes the 8% over coverage that we'd seen in the native mode, and it's now nicely matching the reference space. That in turn improves the colour accuracy from 2.4 to 1.4 delta E average. When it comes to gamma and grayscale, the screen continues to be configured to a 2.2 gamma curve in the DCI-P3 mode. It's a little higher in this mode than the native mode, measured at 2.25 average, with the most variation in the lighter grey shades. Colour temp and white point are still a little too warm, but only by a small amount. We also tested the Adobe RGB emulation mode, which delivers a good clamping of the native gamma as well, cutting out the major overcoverage in reds that you have in the user mode. The accuracy of Adobe RGB colours was good now as well, with delta E 1.8 average measured, although this mode wasn't quite as accurate as the sRGB and DCI-P3 modes. You can see that the gamma is further out from the target line in this mode too, which causes some crushing of dark grey shades and washing out of lighter grey shades. It wasn't too drastic though, and the average gamma was still measured at 2.28. It's nice to see MSI continue to offer this Adobe RGB emulation mode, as it's something that you don't typically see on competing consumer OLED monitors. This is a colour space often used in the photography and professional markets, and with the panel being capable of covering this colour space nicely, it's good to see an emulation mode offered that can clamp it back to Adobe RGB accurately. After calibration and profiling, we had achieved a very accurate setup, helping to correct the gamma, colour temp and grayscale very nicely, while also improving the shadow detail quite a bit. We calibrated the screen in its native gamut mode within the user preset, with the colour space mapped back to sRGB for our profile that can be used in colour aware applications. This gave us very good colour accuracy, as you would hope. You can find our best settings guide video for this screen linked in the description below, covering SDR, HDR and other settings as well. If you want to try out our calibrated ICC profile too, you can find links to that in our database linked in the description below. The high 3840 by 2160 4K resolution is combined with a 240Hz native refresh rate on this screen, and that's a high spec combination to power from even the most powerful systems. Thankfully, the refresh rate is supported by adaptive sync for variable refresh rates, and that's available from compatible graphics card, with the screen also being certified under the NVIDIA G-Sync compatible and AMD FreeSync Premium Pro schemes. That high resolution and pixel density provides a super sharp and clear picture quality, with native support for 4K gaming titles and external consoles. The smaller 27-inch screen size doesn't provide the same level of immersion as the larger 32-inch 4K OLED monitors do, but that may be a more comfortable and convenient size for some people, and it's great to see 4K being offered now in this 27-inch popular screen size. A couple of features missing which you may find on competing OLED gaming screens are black frame insertion and OLED anti-flicker options. BFI, or black frame insertion, is a technology used to improve perceived motion clarity in gaming albeit only available at lower refresh rates, while the anti-flicker settings can cap the VRR range and tweak gamma performance to help reduce any visible flickering that you might experience in VRR gaming situations. You can find both of those features on the competing ASUS ROG Swift PG27UCDM, for instance. We'd love to see MSI explore adding these kind of features on their future OLED monitors in their range too. We don't need to say much about the response times, which are excellent as always from this panel technology. We measured a 0.5 milliseconds grey to grey average, which remains consistent at all refresh rates and across the VRR range as well. That's all without any overshoot to speak of, which is great for nice, clean and fast pixel transitions, easily able to keep up with the 240Hz refresh rate of the panel. When it comes to gaming experience, we've provided some pursuit camera photos here, which demonstrate the real-world perceived motion clarity of the panel, which is exactly the same as other 240Hz OLED monitors that we've tested before. It provides excellent motion clarity for gaming, along with support for high frame rates up to 240 FPS. You can get further small improvements in motion clarity and frame rate support if you move up to the higher refresh rates like 360Hz or even 480Hz now in the OLED market, but the 240Hz offers a very good performance still with super clear motion, and with only serious and competitive gamers likely to see much difference if you move up to a higher refresh rate, and even then only if you can power that higher refresh rate for the games that you play and from the system that you have. If you've got an NVIDIA graphics card with only DisplayPort 1.4, which is any of the NVIDIA graphics cards before the latest RTX 50 series, the screen does not support NVIDIA DSR and DLSR technologies when you're using DSC, even if you select a lower refresh rate and resolution. MSI do provide an option in the on-screen menu to disable DSC, which would open up support for these features. With DSC disabled, the maximum refresh rate that you can select using DisplayPort 1.4 is 4K at 120Hz, although you also have to drop then to a lower colour depth and chroma level. There's no default options actually in the NVIDIA control panel for lower refresh rates than that, other than 60Hz, but you can create a custom resolution if you want, which would allow up to 98Hz with 8-bit colour depth and full 444 chroma. That's probably going to be the best option if you're going to turn DSC off and you're using DisplayPort 1.4. That will give you the highest refresh rate without needing to use unnecessary chroma subsampling. HDMI 2.1 connections can provide a little bit more flexibility due to the higher bandwidth available there, supporting up to 4K 120Hz with 10-bit colour depth and 444 chroma. That's if you disable DSC, so if you have HDMI 2.1 available, you're probably best to use that. If you have a new RTX 50 series NVIDIA graphics card, those support full-speed DisplayPort 2.1 with UHBR20 bandwidth, the same that's offered here on the monitor, and so you should be able to run the screen without DSC being needed at all, and therefore retain access to these NVIDIA DSR and DLSR settings. We're currently sourcing a DisplayPort 2.1 graphics card for some additional testing, and we'll be looking at various DP 2.1 updates and tests in the near future, so do hit subscribe if you want to stay up to date on that. We'll recheck this behaviour for DSR when we do that, but as far as we know, those features should work fine on an RTX 50 card. Having said all that about DSR and DLSR, there may be less value in actually using these NVIDIA scaling features on a screen that's already natively 4K anyway. Certainly lesser value than if the screen was a 1080p or 1440p monitor, so this may all be a little bit irrelevant to most people. Input lag is super low at the native refresh rate, as with all of their other OLED monitors, and so should be perfectly fine even for competitive gaming. It's a bit higher for devices with a fixed 60Hz input, although not too bad compared with many monitors. Although do keep in mind that it's the 240Hz figure that's going to apply for VRR PC gaming anyway. So for the vast majority of situations, you'll be getting that nice low lag. Console support was very good here as well, thanks to the proper full bandwidth HDMI 2.1 ports and the native 4K resolution panel. You can input a 4K 120Hz signal fine, giving you access to HDR capabilities on both the PS5 and Xbox Series X. There's support for features like VRR and HDMI CEC, which are also handy. This screen only supports HDR10 content and not Dolby Vision, so there's a small gap there for some supported games from an Xbox Series X. The only other gaps seem to be the lack of support for 24Hz content at 4K, at least as reported by the Xbox Series X. For office and general uses, one of the biggest improvements with the new 27-inch 4K QD-OLED panels is with the text clarity. Significantly improved here compared with 27-inch 1440p options thanks to the much higher pixel density. We've gone from around 111 ppi on the 1440p panels to around 166 ppi here on the 4K panel. The sub-pixel layout and the shape remains the same as last year's Gen 3 panels, including the 32-inch 4K panels that were released then, but because the pixel density is even higher now, any lingering text clarity problems are basically eliminated. Even when inspecting the screen up very close in a range of office and web applications, we couldn't spot any issues really with fringing or blurring that impacted older QD-OLED panels. We'd already commented in the past about how we felt the 32-inch 4K panels had pretty much resolved these issues at their 140 ppi pixel density, with only very minor visual differences between that and an LCD panel of the same resolution. Here on the 27-inch 4K panel, we think the issue is solved now. As far as we could see, the text rendering looks the same as on an equivalent LCD of the same size and resolution. That makes the screen very well suited now to office and text work if you need to use it in that way. You do need to be mindful of using any OLED monitor for lots of static content though, due to image retention risks of this technology, although the latest Gen 4 panels and the wide range of panel protection features, all backed here by a 3-year burn-in warranty, should give you some added peace of mind. You do need to be conscious though of your usage patterns, as with any OLED monitor. If you're primarily using the screen for gaming and multimedia, this isn't something you need to worry about though. Running at 100% scaling does of course leave you with very small text size on a screen this size, and really these high-resolution 27-inch monitors are designed to be used at either 150% or maybe 125% scaling. Running at 150% scaling would give you the same desktop space as a 1440p monitor, but with a higher pixel density that gives you sharper text and images. The panel resolution doesn't change, but everything is scaled to make proper use of that resolution packed into a smaller screen area. Running at 125% scaling would give you the equivalent desktop space of a hypothetical 3072 by 1728 resolution, so as long as you didn't find the text too small, that could give you a nice boost over the 1440p models as well. That means more desktop space for multitasking and office applications. You can see various measurements here for spectral distribution at a calibrated 6500 Kelvin white point, where the blue peak is at 457 nanometers. That's actually a change for QD-OLED panels, which have previously had the blue peak at 453 nanometers, and which, according to iSafe certification, should provide better and less harmful blue light output. This was an unexpected surprise actually from these new panels, and presumably something Samsung Display have been updating with their newer panels for this year. There's also a low blue light setting in the menu, which basically gives you a warmer image around 5100 Kelvin, which in turn reduces the blue spectral peak and proportion of blue light in the image. We talked earlier about the brightness range of the screen, which should still be adequate for most users, unless you wanted to display the screen in a very bright room, or perhaps if you're used to having an LCD cranked up to its very high brightness level. The brightness is controlled without the need for PWM, and so is flicker-free as expected. We provided some recommended settings here at the bottom to achieve common 200, 150 and 120 nits luminance. The screen can also reach down to a low luminance of around 26 nits if you need to use the screen in a darker environment. The screen also provides super wide viewing angles that are common on OLED panels. This makes it really easy to use the screen from a variety of viewing positions. The standard semi-glossy QD-OLED panel coating provides the usual clean and clear image, which we prefer generally over the grainier looking anti-glare coating of competing WOLED monitors. Although it can lead to more glare and reflections, so you do need to be mindful of your ambient lighting levels and the position of those. You'll get more noticeable reflections in well-lit rooms or if you've got windows or lamps that are facing the screen. There's a very good range of extra features that enhance the user experience, including USB Type-C with DP Alt mode and a high 98 watts power delivery for single cable connectivity from laptops and other devices. There's some USB data ports as normal, a KVM switch function so that you can use two connected systems from a single keyboard and mouse if you want. Picture-in-picture and picture-by-picture are also available if you want to handle multiple video inputs on the screen at once. a very good range of features on this model, like on their other recent OLED screens, which is great to see. Being an OLED panel, the MPG272URX is well suited to handling HDR content with its per pixel level dimming, true blacks, and basically infinite contrast ratio. This offers blooming and halo-free performance that surpasses what is possible from LCD monitors, including those with mini LED backlights. The trade-off is screen brightness though, with OLEDs not being able to match the brightness of high-end LCD monitors in this way, especially in brighter high APL scenes. Small highlights can reach high peak brightness in some situations and configurations, but if you're after a bright and punchy HDR experience, then OLED panels can often struggle compared with mini LED backlight LCD monitors. On the MPG272URX, there's support for HDR10 content only, and it's unfortunately missing the Dolby Vision HDR support that the Asus model offers. That can be handy for Xbox Series X gaming or some streaming video devices, for instance. As with MSI's other QD-OLED monitors, this screen has been certified under the VESA Display HDR 400 True Black tier as well. Being a QD-OLED panel, you do need to be mindful of your lighting positioning and lighting levels, as bright light sources located in front of the screen can impact the perceived black depth because of the lack of a polarizer on the panel and the inadvertent activation of the quantum dot layer. That causes blacks to be raised and sometimes start to look more grey in appearance in bright rooms. You can help mitigate this issue somewhat by viewing HDR content in a darker room or positioning your ambient light sources behind the screen, but it's not ideal. This is an inherent challenge on QD-OLED panels, and we explored this in detail in our previous study, and so the ambient light handling is poor here relative to competing WOLED panels. It remains the same as previous QD-OLED generations though. There's not been any improvements or change in that area with the new 2025 panels, sadly. The MPG272URX includes two familiar HDR modes in the menu, one for True Black 400 and the other for Peak 1000. Even on the latest currently available firmware at the time of this testing, the screen does not yet include any of the updates to address the Peak 1000 mode brightness, including the initial attempt that was made by MSI earlier this year for some of their other models. That still requires some further work, and we're told that that's still being worked on by MSI, and we expect to see a further update of the firmware at some point in the near future. For now, the two modes behave very similarly to previous MSI QD-OLED monitors that we've tested. The True Black 400 mode offers accurate EOTF tracking across different APLs, and so the grayscale brightness is as it should be regardless of the content. There's some minor roll-off in light grey shades as the APL increases, but that helps to preserve tonal values when the screen can't reach quite as bright anyway. The colour temp is a little too warm, we found, with a 6 to 7% error and giving a slight orangey tint to the lighter grey and white shades. Unfortunately, there's no access to adjust the RGB channels or colour temp within the HDR modes, which could have offered a bit of flexibility here. Colour gamut covers 79% of the Rec 2020 colour space, which is basically on par with previous QD-OLED monitors, and thanks to the quantum dot layer, this provides a wider colour space by around 8 to 10% higher coverage than modern WOLED panels. Colour accuracy for HDR content was very good as well. The familiar challenge with this True Black 400 mode though is that the peak brightness is capped to around 468 nits, so it can't reach up to the panel's advertised 1000 nits. In practice, this does help to avoid noticeable panel dimming when content changes at least, but you're not going to get the brightest highlights in darker scenes that you might otherwise manage if it had reached a higher peak luminance. In contrast, if you switch to the Peak 1000 HDR mode, the peak white luminance can now get higher, reaching up to 1008 nits and meeting the advertised spec. Comparing just these measurements for white, on the face of it, this might imply that the Peak 1000 mode is the same overall, except that it can reach the higher luminance for small highlights and low APL scenes. Unfortunately, as we know, there's more to it than that on QD-OLED monitors, and the Peak 1000 mode at the moment causes additional dimming in real-world content. The culprit, as anyone who's followed this issue over the last year or so will know, is poor EOTF tracking in the Peak 1000 mode. You can see just how accurate things are here in the True Black 400 mode across different APL, but it's not nearly as accurate in the Peak 1000 mode. You get a common dip in the luminance for mid-grey shades in the middle of the graphs, which translates to lower luminance in many real-world situations. We can measure the average grayscale luminance for both modes, which provides a helpful comparison of the luminance beyond just those simple white measurements that we took earlier. You can see here that the True Black 400 mode actually ends up being brighter in all but the lowest APL scenes due to this EOTF tracking issue. The Peak 1000 mode has a very similar grayscale colour temp and white point as the True Black 400 mode, being a little bit too warm again, and the colour gamut coverage and colour accuracy for HDR content remain very good. You'll probably want to experiment with both of these modes, as unfortunately there's still no single mode that offers the best of both worlds. The Peak 1000 mode may be better for darker content as it can reach the highest peak brightness, but the True Black 400 mode is likely to be better for lighter content or more general HDR material. Hopefully MSI will provide a further firmware update at some point soon to improve that Peak 1000 mode further so that you can have the best of both worlds. Overall then, the MPG 272 URX was another very impressive QD-OLED monitor outing from MSI, and we were impressed by its extensive feature set and very good all-round performance. Features like a proper full-speed DisplayPort 2.1 connection to support modern and future graphics cards, USB Type-C with high power delivery, a KVM switch, and an extensive range of OLED Care features are nice to see available here. A few things are missing that are starting to become more common in the OLED monitor market, like black frame insertion, VRR anti-flicker modes, Dolby Vision HDR support, and proximity sensors for OLED Care. Those are things that we'd love to see MSI consider for future monitors in their range. The 4K resolution on this new 27-inch screen provides a super sharp and clear image, providing excellent text clarity for office applications, as well as native support for 4K gaming and video, which provides an amazing picture quality. There's a lot of options and modes which provide a good level of accuracy along with excellent gaming performance, excellent motion clarity, low input lag, and great console support. The MPG 272 URX is priced at $1,100 at the time of this video, making it around $100 less than ASUS's model, but around $200 more than Dell's equivalent. They've got their Alienware AW2725Q. This feels about right, we think, relative to the competition, although it's not as aggressively priced as some of their older and earlier OLED monitors. This could vary by region, of course, and you can check availability and pricing using our links in the description below. The ASUS model has a few extra features like BFI, anti-flicker settings, a proximity sensor, and Dolby Vision HDR support, so you'll have to decide if any of those are important to you and worth the extra $100 for their model. The Dell is $200 less than the MSI model, but only has DisplayPort 1.4, which may put some people off who have modern systems and graphics cards. It's also missing USB Type-C and a KVM switch. But it does, on the other hand, have Dolby Vision HDR and even eARC sound support. It really depends what features you need, of course, when deciding between these screens, which all use the same underlying QD-OLED monitor panel. If you decide you don't really want or need 4K resolution, MSI's MPG 271 QRX provides an excellent 1440p option with a higher 360Hz refresh rate for gaming and a lower price point of around $760 at the time of this video. But if you're after a 4K 27-inch OLED monitor, this MPG 272 URX is an excellent choice and definitely worth a look. If you've enjoyed this review, please just give us a quick like and subscribe below, that would be really appreciated. If you'd like to help support the content that we produce here at TFT Central, you can find links to our Patreon below, where you can get various benefits like early access to new reviews and articles. Let us know in the comments section below if you're thinking of buying one of these new 27-inch QD-OLED monitors and which one, or if you're waiting for something different later in the year. Thank you for watching, we'll catch you next time.